The galaxy was never silent. Stars burned, planets moved, and great ships crossed the endless dark with engines brighter than suns. Civilizations rose and fell, each believing they were strong, each thinking they were wise. Among them, the Zirans stood above all others. The Zirans were proud of their minds. They were not the biggest or strongest species, but they were the smartest. For thousands of years, they had built machines that could read anything. Their scanners could peel away the secrets of entire planets. They could see through walls, through shields, through the hearts of enemy ships. Nothing was hidden from them. Knowledge was their weapon, and knowledge always gave them victory. When the Zirans heard whispers of a new species called humans, they were not afraid. They were curious. Humans had only recently entered the wider galaxy. They came from a single blue planet at the edge of a quiet system. To the Zirans, they were children, young, emotional, reckless. A race like that could never hide from the scanners of the great Ziran fleets. But then something strange happened. Reports arrived of a single human warship entering Ziran territory. It did not travel with a fleet. It did not send out greetings or trade requests. It did not even broadcast a warning. It simply came forward, silent and steady, like a predator that had already chosen its prey. The warship itself was a sight that made many stare. It was huge, darker than the void around it, as if it carried the night on its hull. Thin lines of white and blue light ran across its armor, glowing faintly like veins under skin. No insignia, no symbols, nothing to identify its purpose. Only silence. On the Ziran flagship Mind's Eye, the officers studied the strange vessel. They laughed at first. One called it a drifting tomb. Another said it looked like an old freighter with stolen weapons. Even Admiral Seltrax, commander of the fleet, dismissed it with a smile. "Whatever secrets it hides, we will know them soon," the Admiral said. His voice was calm, filled with confidence. "The scanners of the Mind's Eye will peel it open like fruit." Around him, officers bowed their heads in agreement. None of them doubted their technology. None of them doubted their intelligence. For centuries, every enemy had fallen before the sharp gaze of the Zirans. This human ship would be no different, and yet, a few junior officers felt a chill. They could not explain why, but there was something wrong about the silence of the warship. Every ship in the galaxy carried signals, communications, energy patterns, life signs. But this ship gave nothing. It was like staring at a shadow that refused to move. Still, duty was duty. Orders were orders. And so preparations began. In the great scanner chamber of the Mind's Eye, machines hummed and glowed. Neural crowns were placed upon the officers' heads, linking their minds with the vast intelligence of the ship. The Zirans were ready. Soon they would see inside the strange human warship. They would learn its secrets. They would add humanity to their growing book of knowledge. As the process began, the Admiral stood tall, proud of his people. To him, this was not a battle. It was only another study, another puzzle to be solved. Humans were just another species, and species always revealed themselves in time. But outside, in the cold dark of space, the human warship drifted closer. Its lights pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Its weapons stayed silent. No message came, and in that silence, in that stillness, something ancient seemed to wait. The Zirans believed they were about to open the human ship and learn everything about it. What they did not know was this. The moment their scanners touched it, the warship would not only show them steel and circuits, it would show them humanity itself. And the galaxy was not ready for that. Inside the great scanner chamber of the Mind's Eye, the air was heavy with expectation. The room was circular, its walls glowing faintly with streams of light like rivers of knowledge flowing in every direction. Dozens of officers stood in silence, each wearing a shining neural crown. These crowns connected their thoughts to the great machine that had made the Zirans feared across the stars. When the order was given, the room came alive. Humming filled the air, deep and steady, like the breathing of a giant. The scanners turned toward the human warship, stretching invisible hands of energy across the void. At first, everything was normal. The scanners touched the outer layers of the ship, mapping the strange alloys that covered its hull. The material was unusual, strong, and dense. Notes appeared on glowing screens. Symbols danced across walls. The officers leaned forward, interested but not impressed. "Strange construction," one officer murmured. "Not like the alloys of the southern empires." "Primitive," another said. "Crude layering, inefficient patterns." Admiral Seltrax only smiled. Continue. The scanners pushed deeper. They moved past the armor and touched the inner systems. Energy patterns appeared, showing weapons, engines, and shields. The ship was clearly built for war, yet its design was unlike anything the Xyrans had seen. The weapons seemed too large, too heavy. The shields pulsed in strange rhythms, almost alive. Still, the officers were calm. They had seen many weapons. They had studied thousands of shields. Nothing about this frightened them. Not yet. Then the scanners pressed further. They reached the central core of the ship, where human minds worked alongside machines, where the soul of the warship lived. The moment the scanners touched that core, something changed. The hum in the chamber deepened. It no longer sounded like a machine. It sounded like a growl. The glowing walls flickered. Streams of data twisted into shapes that looked almost alive. One officer frowned. The readings? They are not clear, another gasped. I feel something watching me. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Nonsense, focus, continue the scan. But the officers could not ignore what was happening. The numbers on their screens no longer looked like numbers. Lines of code bent into images. Circles formed. Then pupils. Then eyes. Dozens of eyes stared back at them from the screens, glowing cold and unblinking. A shiver ran through the room. One officer tore his crown off. This is wrong. It's looking back at us. Celtrax turned sharply. Control yourself. It is only resistance data. Nothing more. But even as he spoke, his own screen flickered. Shapes moved across it. Shapes of soldiers walking through smoke, carrying weapons scarred by fire. Behind them, cities burned. Oceans boiled. The officers gasped as the visions pressed into their minds. These were not just pictures. They were memories. Memories of war. Memories of death. Memories of survival carved into bone and blood. One officer cried out, clutching his head. Another fell to the floor, trembling as if the weight of 1,000 lives had been forced into his thoughts. The crowns burned hot against their skin as though the ship itself was trying to climb into their minds. Admiral, a technician shouted, his voice shaking. The ship is not being scanned. The ship is scanning us. For the first time, Celtrax hesitated. His heart beat faster, but his pride refused to let him show fear. He clenched his fists and ordered, "Hold the scan. We will not be frightened by illusions." But deep inside, even he could feel it now. The heavy, watching presence pressing against his thoughts. The human warship was not silent anymore. It had awakened, and with every passing moment, the mind's eye was no longer in control. Admiral Celtrax stood tall in the command chamber of the mind's eye. His face was calm. His posture proud, but deep inside a shadow of unease had begun to form. He had led fleets into battles against countless enemies. He had seen worlds fall and empires bend to the power of the Xyrans. Yet never before had he seen his officers break under a scan. The neural crown sparked with bursts of light as officers struggled to stay connected. Their hands shook. Their eyes watered. Their lips trembled as if they were whispering silent prayers. The visions that poured into their minds were unlike anything they had studied before. One officer cried out, It's endless. Flames, battles, screams." He pulled at his crown, but it clung to his head like claws. Another officer gasped for air, his voice shaking. "They keep standing. No matter what happens, they rise again." Celtrax's jaw tightened. Nonsense. "These are illusions." Tricks meant to frighten us, but the visions only grew stronger. The screens showed soldiers walking across fields of fire, their bodies broken yet their eyes burning with determination. They carried flags torn by wind and blood, yet they never let them fall. Behind them, the ground shook with thunder as machines of war marched endlessly forward. The officers felt the weight of every step. They felt hunger, fear, pain, yet they also felt the strength of something greater, a will that refused to break. "Admiral," a young technician whispered, his voice cracking, "this is not data. This is memory. Real memory." Celtrax turned sharply, his eyes burning with pride. "No, humans are young. They have not seen the wars of the ancients. They cannot possibly," but before he could finish, the ship's systems groaned. The chamber flickered with ghostly images. It was no longer or just the officers seeing the visions. The mind's eye itself was projecting them across the room. The Xyrans now stood inside the storm. They saw trenches filled with mud and blood, where human soldiers huddled against the cold. They saw skies lit with fire as bombs rained down, shaking the earth beneath their boots. They saw oceans turning red as steel beasts clashed above and beneath the waves. The officers could feel it all, the sting of smoke in their lungs, the ringing in their ears after explosions, the pounding of hearts that refused to stop beating. One officer fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. How did they survive this? Another whispered, trembling, how many times did they suffer? How many times did they rise? Seltrax's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to order them to stand strong, but the images pressed against even his own mind. For a moment he felt himself walking through the ruins of a broken city, dust and fire around him, a weapon clutched in his hand. He felt hunger in his stomach, grief in his chest, but still he kept moving forward. The Admiral shook his head violently, trying to push the vision away. "This is not real," he shouted. "We are Zerans. We do not bend to fear." But the truth was already there. His crew was breaking. His officers were falling. And deep inside, even he could feel it, the terrifying strength hidden in the memories of humanity. The technician spoke again, his voice almost a whisper, filled with dread. "Admiral, the ship isn't showing us weakness. It's showing us how they endure, how they never stop, how they never give up." Silence filled the chamber. The officers no longer argued. They no longer laughed. All they could do was watch as the human warship continued to bleed its memories into their minds. And for the first time in his long career, Admiral Seltrax felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. Fear, far away, deep inside the silent human warship. The crew sat in calm silence. The ship drifted in space like a predator watching its prey. Yet the humans aboard did not seem worried. Their faces were calm, their movements slow and steady, as if they already knew what was happening outside. The captain of the warship, an older man with silver in his hair, stood at the center of the bridge. His eyes watched the stars without blinking. Around him his crew worked quietly. No one rushed, no one panicked. They had seen this before. "Are they scanning us?" one young officer asked, his voice soft. The captain nodded once. "Yes, and they will regret it." There was no pride in his voice, no arrogance. Only certainty. The humans knew what their warships carried. They were not just machines of metal and fire. They were something deeper, mirrors of humanity itself. Every wire, every circuit, every program was built on centuries of struggle. The ships were made to fight, but they also remembered. And when someone tried to pierce their hearts with scanners, the ships did not reveal their weaknesses. Instead, they revealed humanity. On the Zyran flagship, that revelation was already spreading like a storm. Officers were breaking under the weight of human memories, memories of pain, of endurance, of hope, burning in the darkest times. The humans had always known this was how others would react, because no species, no matter how strong or intelligent, could ever understand what it meant to be human until they faced it directly. The captain's eyes narrowed as he spoke softly, almost to himself. "They wanted to see what we hide. Let them see. Let them understand why we survive." Behind him, a young crew member frowned. "But sir, why do they always underestimate us?" The captain gave a sad smile. "Because we look fragile. Because we live shorter lives. Because they do not see the fire inside us until it's too late." The crew fell silent again. Each of them carried their own scars, their own losses. They were children of Earth, a world that had never been kind, a world that taught them to fight through hunger, war, storms, and endless struggle. They carried the blood of ancestors who had survived against all odds. That was why their ships were different. A human warship was not just a weapon. It was a shadow of humanity itself. And shadows were not easy to face. Back on the mind's eye, the Zerans were learning this painful truth. Their scanners pushed harder, desperate to control the flood, but the harder they pushed, the deeper they sank. Visions grew sharper. They saw humans standing in ruined cities, holding children in their arms even as fire rained from the sky. They saw men and women facing impossible battles, outnumbered, outgunned, but never surrendering. They saw tears. They saw laughter. They saw rage. And through it all, they saw a strength that no scanner could measure. One Zyran officer collapsed, whispering in horror, They do not break. They never break." Another clutched his chest, trembling. How can such fragile creatures carry such endless pain? The Admiral tried to stay firm, but even he felt the weight pressing into his bones. He had fought many wars, but never had he faced an enemy that fought inside the mind, inside the soul. On the human bridge, the crew sat in silence. They did not cheer at the suffering of their enemies. They did not smile at their fear. They simply waited, because they knew the truth. The Zirans had wanted to scan a human warship, but what they had truly scanned was humanity itself. And once seen, it could never be forgotten. The Mind's Eye had been the pride of the Ziran fleet. It was not only a ship, it was a symbol of power, of intelligence, of victory. No enemy had ever stood against its scanners and survived with secrets intact. It was said that the Mind's Eye could see through anything, could know anything. But now, in the scanner chamber, that pride was crumbling. The officers screamed as visions tore through their minds. Sparks shot from the neural crowns. Smoke filled the air as circuits burned under the strain. What should have been streams of clean numbers and patterns had become storms of fire, blood, and human voices. The Zirans tried to fight it. They tried to pull the data apart, to analyze it, to make it logical. But the more they resisted, the more the memories dug in. The human warship was no longer silent. It was alive in their minds, whispering, roaring, and demanding to be seen. "Stop the scan," one officer cried, pulling at the wires. His hands shook as if they belonged to someone else. Another officer collapsed to the floor, clutching her head, whispering words in a language she did not know. The ship's intelligence itself, the vast machine that guided the Mind's Eye, began to stutter. Its voice, once smooth and confident, broke into fragments. From its speakers came not Ziran language but human words, harsh, heavy, and filled with emotion. "Run, fight, endure," the machine whispered again and again. The Admiral's face went pale. He had never heard the great intelligence lose control. He shouted, "Shut it down! Shut everything down!" But it was too late. The visions grew stronger. The Zirans saw entire planets burning, not because of alien invasions, but because of wars humans had fought against each other. They saw millions dead, yet still humanity stood. They saw ships built in desperation, crewed by men and women with nothing left but the will to fight. They saw mothers holding children under ruined skies, whispering promises of tomorrow even when tomorrow seemed impossible. Every image carried pain. Every memory carried weight. And yet, under all the suffering, there was something unbreakable. Hope. The officers tried to scream it away, but the memories clung to their minds like chains. The harder they fought, the deeper the images sank. Panels exploded around them. Flames licked the walls of the chamber. The great scanner engines shook as their power coils melted under the pressure of the human flood. The Mind's Eye was collapsing from within. Admiral Seltrax stood in the center, his hands shaking though he forced his back to remain straight. His pride told him to stay firm, but his eyes betrayed him. He saw the ghosts of humanity standing in the chamber itself, walking through the smoke, staring at him with eyes that never blinked. One of his officers cried out, "Admiral, we cannot stop it." Another screamed, "It's inside us! They are inside us!" And then, with a final surge, the main intelligence of the Mind's Eye gave out. The lights went dark. The chamber filled with silence, broken only by the sound of officers sobbing on the floor. The mighty flagship of the Ziran fleet had not been destroyed by weapons. It had not been broken by missiles or cannons. It had been broken by memory. Out in the dark, the human warship still floated silently. Its weapons never fired. Its shields never flared. It had done nothing but wait. The Mind's Eye had fallen, not because humanity attacked, but because humanity had survived. And survival was the sharpest weapon of all. The fall of the Mind's Eye did not remain a secret for long. The Zirans were too proud, too loud, and too feared for such a disaster to stay hidden. Whispers carried through the trade lanes, carried by frightened merchants and wandering scouts. Soon every corner of the galaxy had heard the story. The tale always began the same. A single human warship entered Ziran space. The smartest species in the Orion Arm turned its most powerful scanners upon it, and then, without a single shot fired, the flagship of the Ziran fleet collapsed, its crew broken by visions they could not endure. Some laughed at first. The Krell, a warrior race with bones like steel, mocked the Zirans. They were weak, they said. They feared shadows. No ship could break a mind. But curiosity has always been dangerous. The Krell tried it for themselves. One of their war bands intercepted a lone human vessel. Their scanners, built for hunting and war, reached inside, and then the same flood came. The Krell screamed as memories of human battlefields poured into their thoughts. They saw soldiers with torn uniforms holding the line against impossible odds. They saw men and women charging into fire not for victory, but to buy time for their families to escape. They saw eyes filled with tears and rage, promising to rise even if the world itself burned. The Krell's warriors, proud and fearless, collapsed into silence. Many never recovered. The story spread again. Next, the Shi'Lari, a race of scholars, tested their scanners against a human cruiser. They believed their calm minds, trained in logic and reason, would withstand the storm. But when the flood reached them, their logic crumbled. They saw grief, loss, and the endless strength that rose from it. They saw songs sung in trenches, laughter among ruins, hope where none should exist. The Shi'Lari wept, their fragile hearts unable to hold the weight of such memories. One by one, every race that tried to scan a human warship met the same fate. Some were broken, some went mad, some simply fell silent, never speaking again, and with each attempt the warning grew louder. Do not scan the humans. Do not look inside their ships. Because their ships did not only carry weapons, they carried humanity itself. And humanity was too vast, too fierce, too painful, and too beautiful to endure. In council halls across the stars, leaders argued about what to do. Some wanted to attack humans before they became too strong. Others wanted to leave them alone, to let them remain a mystery. But in the quiet corners of every empire, whispers spread. They survived everything their own world threw at them. What will they survive out here? If their memories alone can break us, what will their weapons do? They are fragile in body but not in spirit. Perhaps that makes them the most dangerous of all. Fear grew like fire in dry grass. Races that had once believed themselves unshakable now looked at human ships with dread. Even a lone vessel drifting through space was enough to make fleets retreat, and the humans knew it. On their silent bridges, captains gave no boasts, no threats. They simply traveled, calm and watchful, as if the galaxy's fear was nothing new. And in truth, it wasn't. Humanity had always been feared, if not by aliens, then by the storms, wars, and endless struggles of their own world. Now, the galaxy was learning what Earth had always known. You do not look into the heart of humanity without paying a price. The human warship drifted silently, its black hull gleaming faintly under distant starlight. To those who watched from afar, it looked like a shadow moving across the galaxy, calm and unhurried, as if nothing could touch it. Inside, the crew went about their duties with quiet discipline. There was no celebration, no talk of victory, no arrogance. For them, the collapse of the mind's eye was not a triumph. It was simply another truth revealed. On the bridge, Admiral Kieran stood with his hands behind his back, his gaze fixed on the endless stars. His face was worn with years of service, his eyes carrying the weight of memories too heavy to name. Around him, his officers worked silently, their expressions steady. One young officer finally spoke, breaking the calm. "Sir, why do they fear us so much?" The Admiral's lips curved into a sad smile. He did not answer at once. Instead, he walked slowly to the center of the bridge, his boots echoing softly against the floor. He looked at his crew, men and women who had left families behind on Earth, who carried their own scars of loss and hope. "They fear us," he said at last, his voice low but steady, "because when they look at us, they see something they cannot understand." The officer frowned. "What do you mean, sir?" The Admiral's eyes softened and he spoke as if telling a story. "Other species believe strength comes from power, from technology, from perfect minds. But humanity's strength has never been in perfection. It has always been in endurance. We suffer, but we rise again. We fall, but we keep walking. We lose everything, yet we still hope." That is what they saw when they scanned us, and that is why they fear. The bridge fell silent. The crew listened, their hearts heavy but proud. Each of them knew the truth of those words. They had seen it in their own lives, in the struggles of their world, in the history of their people. Humanity had never had it easy, but they had always endured. Outside, in the vast galaxy, the whispers continued to spread. Entire fleets turned away when they detected a human ship nearby. Empires began issuing strict orders. Never scan a human warship. Traders gave warnings in hushed voices. Soldiers told stories to frighten each other at night. Some races called humans cursed. Others called them monsters. But deep inside, they all knew the truth. Humanity was neither cursed nor monstrous. Humanity was simply unbreakable. Admiral Kieran looked once more at the stars. He did not smile. He did not speak again. His crew returned to their work, guiding the warship onward. There was no need for words, no need for boasting. The galaxy's fear was not their weapon. Their weapon was survival, and survival was stronger than fear. For the Zirans, for the Krell, for the Shalari, and for every other race that had dared to scan a human ship, the memory would never fade. The fire, the blood, the laughter among ruins, the endless rising after every fall, it would haunt them forever. That was the lesson humanity carried into the stars. You could measure their weapons, you could count their ships, you could even take their lives, but you could never break their spirit. And so the galaxy came to understand why even the smartest aliens feared scanning human warships, because in that moment they were not facing machines, they were not facing weapons, they were facing humanity itself. And no mind in the universe could look upon humanity's story and remain unchanged.